proclaim ourselves. We proclaim Jesus Christ as Lord and ourselves as your slaves for Jesus' sake. For it is the God who said, "Let light shine out of darkness," who has shown us in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. But we have this treasure in clay jars, so that it may be made clear that this extraordinary power belongs to God and does not come from us. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed, always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be made visible in our bodies. For while we live, we are always being given up to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus may be made visible in our mortal flesh. So death is at work in us, but life in you. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Our gospel reading today comes from John's Gospel, chapter 1, verses 45 through 46. Listen again for God's word. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found him, about whom Moses and the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus, son of Joseph from Nazareth." Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Philip said to him, "Come and see." Sisters and brothers, this is the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ. Thanks be to God. The past 5 weeks, today is week number 6, we have heard from various friends and members of the congregation about how God's covenant love has been at work in their lives. And this has been a fun experiment for me to hear people's testimonies about God's faithfulness through thick and through thin. And today we are privileged to have Ms. Elizabeth Waters with us to come and share her story about God's covenant love. So let's welcome Elizabeth to the stage. Elizabeth, thank you for being the grand finale of this experiment. And we've tried to begin these interview series just by sharing a brief biography of who you are. So we're going to witness something incredibly special, and all of this is my friend Elizabeth's idea. So let's begin with this brief video that best explains who Elizabeth Waters is.
Some time ago, she asked the Lord into her heart, and Janice and I were present for that one evening. And we just held off on the baptism until we had time to investigate it, until we thought that she was ready, until she thought that she was ready. And she's been after us for quite some time. Anyway, we were down there yesterday going through what was going to happen, so she wouldn't be so frightened. And this is more or less a confirmation, a sealing in front of the body of what's already occurred, because Jesus is in her heart. And I've been blessed as a father to see her witness to her friends and tell them about the Lord and what happens if you don't have the Lord in her. So she's already been ministering. Anyway, Elizabeth, it's time for the confession. She does know what all that means.
challenging for us to hear, but we all knew what was happening in that clip. So tell us about why that's the beginning of your story today.
Well, that's where I feel like my relationship with the Lord began. Do you want me to talk about like my family origin stuff first, or just do a little intro about me first? What do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, real quick. So I'm Elizabeth Waters. I've been attending Covenant now for, I think 3 years. I'm married to Chris Waters, and we have Ethan and Alethea. I'm sure you've seen him running around. And we've been in Boise for about 6 years. So that's who I am real quick. So I grew up, obviously, from what you saw, in a Christian home. My dad was not only the worship pastor, but elder in our church, and baptized me. And yeah, I don't know what to.
So there's this button here when you want to add slides.
There we are, and all our glory in the 80s. I was born in the 80s, so that was probably about, 81 or 82, somewhere in there. That's my older brother, Jim. He was about 3.5 years older than me. And yeah, I grew up with a knowledge of Jesus Christ as Lord. Loved God. When I was a child, I accepted Christ and was baptized, as you saw, when I was 7. And it was something that was a big part of my life. Even then, I just had this deep longing to know God. And it was really there for me a lot in my childhood. There's me on Easter in front of our church. I think I was probably about my son's age, Ethan, and I was about 9 there. And that was a really big thing for me. That being said, there were things that happened that did impact my view of the church and my view of God as I was growing into that faith at a young age. I grew up in a non-denominational church, Christian church, but at a really young age, there were things that happened in the church that really kind of shook my idea of what church should be like. I'm only going to name a few, but the first thing, when I was about this age, our head pastor actually came out that he was sexually abusing children, and particularly his own, and it was a big deal. Kind of shook our church to the core. And I learned that church wasn't necessarily as safe as I thought it was. Also in my own family, there was an uncle who was a sexually abuser, and he abused my brother and I, unbeknownst to my parents during this time as well. And so, even though I had this love for God, I also had a great fear and mistrust of those that I was supposed to be able to trust. And that was with me, and continues to be. Because of this stuff going on in our family, my parents did their best to help us work through that, but particularly my brother, who had a lot of the brunt of the abuse, there was a lot of anger, and that remained with him for his whole life. And so in our home, things were difficult. He became very violent and abusive,
And this is your brother
my
that
brother,
you're talking about.
Yeah, physically abusive, and it was a scary thing. But my parents, they had him in counseling, and they were doing the best they could with it. At that time also, though, in the church was noticing his behavior and began a series of experiences that we had over those years that I became very angry with the church, because the one place that I felt should be accepting ended up becoming a place of rejection for my family. A lot of judgment happening, a lot of cruelty, and I became very, very angry. So not long after this, I would say maybe a few years, around 11, I decided that the church wasn't for me anymore. And if this is what love and acceptance was like, I didn't want it. And so I began looking for it in other ways. I still believed in God, I just didn't believe in his church. And so there's me, age 12. And the reason I chose this picture was because this was where my journey with alcohol and drugs began. Actually, I was 11, excuse me. That's where that began. And this is about covenant's love, God's covenant love and addiction. That's what this talk is about. Because I am a recovering drug addict and alcoholic. I'm just going to put that out there right now. So that started when I was 11. My brother was already very involved with it. And him and his friends thought it would be funny to get his sister stoned. And me not really knowing what was going on, said, oh yeah, I want to be part of it. And so that began that journey for me with that. At 12, I started drinking. And I just want to stop here for a little bit because up until this point, as I said, I decided that church wasn't for me anymore. Church was a place where I didn't feel safe, where I felt rejected. And so I started being around people who were, I felt a lot of acceptance and love. And they happened to be people who drank and used. And I felt like their love for me wasn't conditional. That's how it felt at the time. I'm not saying it wasn't true, but that's how it felt as an 11-year-old and a 12-year-old. And I thought, when I started engaging in this behavior, it made sense in that way, but for me, it also made sense where all that anger and the self-loathing and all those feelings I had and all the confusion that I had from these experiences I had up to this point, the alcohol, it solved that for me. It's like it filled this hole, and I felt like a relief that I hadn't felt anywhere else. And so I pursued that with everything I had. It's all I ever thought about, all I ever wanted to do. Now, unlike my brother, who everyone knew, this was a part of his life. He was a drug dealer in town and these kinds of things. And mine was a little more on the inside. So I was involved in sports growing up, different things like that. No one would look at me and say, oh, there she goes. I mean, at least not for a while. But the point I'm trying to get across is everything looked okay on the outside. Well, inside I was just falling apart. Went through high school, things progressed. Here's a shot of me and my brother, both under the influence of this, you can't tell. Like again, we look great on the outside. But into high school, late high school, I started getting into very hard drugs. I don't need to go into what they were, but they were highly addictive and really intense. And that continued on into college. When I hit college, alcohol became more front and center for me. Blacked out all the time, wake up in strange places with strange people. This was just my life. It was taking a toll, but I didn't really know how to stop. I'd been using since I was 11. My faith was one that I always believed there was a God, but not that God wasn't necessarily interested in me. Now I want to back up for a minute. After that first pastor had left, there was a pastor that came into our church. His name was Hal. And if there's ever a man of God that I've ever known, it was that man. He was in his 80s when he took over the role of that man that was there before, and he really restored the church in a lot of ways. But he was the one man who, when I was in the grip of what I call a disease, because in my mind, alcoholism and addiction are a disease, that man would come up to me every single Sunday, and he would smile at me, and he would shake my hand, and he would tell me that I sparkled. He always said that. He's like, he called me Sparkling Elizabeth. And I didn't understand it because inside I was a mess. And I hated myself and I hated what I was doing, but I didn't know how to stop. But that first video you saw my dad always told me that grace is not conditional. And that when you have the Lord in your life, God never leaves you, whether or not you leave God, you know? And when I was thinking about what I was going to be saying to all of you, it was that memory came up of that man, Pastor Hal, who always told me that I sparkled. And I now know that it was God in me, you know, still there with me as I walked through all of this. So, anyway, I get to college. My brother and I are both neck deep in this stuff. By this point, my brother's in heroin, and I don't really remember about 3 years of my college career. And this is about when this photo was taken. Pretty soon after this, my brother ended up almost dying and got sober. And this was something that I wanted to do, I tried to do, but I didn't know how to do. I remember there were so many nights when I would cry out to God, help me stop. I don't know how to stop. Up to this point, I was in my 20s, I'd lived almost all the memories that I had were under the influence of something. And the next day I would have this conviction that I was going to be different, and it was going to be different if I just did these things. That's all I knew about God. Just do the right thing and everything will be fine. And I could never do it. I could never do it, and then I'd just be drunk again, or I'd be high again. And I was so hopeless. Right before things started changing for me, my dad and my parents, as you can imagine, having both children who were drug addicts and alcoholics, they were just beside themselves. They raised their kids up in this certain way, and this is how we ended up, you know, and they didn't understand it. But my dad was listening, he was driving one day, and he was listening to a pastor on the radio giving a sermon. And the pastor gave a verse, which I will share with you. And the verse gave hope to my dad, because in that moment, he felt like God was saying, I've got Elizabeth, don't worry about it. And the verse was Jeremiah 33:3, which says, for you do not know the things which I will do. Oh God, I wish I could remember the rest of it. Can you look it up for me?
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you. I had it in my head, now it's gone. I'll have this pastor read it.
Do you want to read it or me?
No, you go ahead.
All right, Jeremiah 33:3. Call to me and I will answer you, and will tell you great and hidden things that you have not known.
There it is. And so my dad called me. We got home. He says, Elizabeth, God's going to do something in your life, and I know it. God told me it's going to be okay. And I remember wanting to believe him. And I kind of did, but I just didn't know how it was going to happen, you know? And I think what I was going through lasted for another 6 months or so. And I remember vaguely in one of my blackouts kind of coming out and telling people, I'm going to change, you know, it's going to be different. And they're, sure, Elizabeth, sure. I'm like, no, God said so. And they were like, whatever, you're delusional. But I really believed it, you know, I really believed even though I ran from the church, I still believed in God. I never doubted that God was there. I just didn't know how to access him necessarily. Anyway, fast forward, when I'm 21. Life has become to where I couldn't imagine living the way I was living, and I couldn't imagine not living the way I was living. You know, I was at this deep, dark place, and I had a really big bottom. I was living in Eugene, Oregon at the time. Everything that goes along to Eugene, Oregon. And I got to this point where I'm like, I just can't do this anymore. And so I got on my knees one night, and I said, okay, God, I know everyone told me that you are, but I want you to show me who you are. And God showed up. And little by little, things started to change. God told me, you need to get out of Eugene and go back home. So I left everybody I knew, I left all my friends, I left that entire life, and I went home. You have to understand, I had been under the influence for 10 years at that point. I didn't know how to live, literally, apart from it. I didn't know how to talk to people. I didn't know how to interact with people. I didn't know how to live life at all. And I'm starting over. And so I'd go back to the church. So what else am I gonna do? You know, I don't know what to do. I start helping out in a youth group there. And slowly, you know, things get better. I decide, you know, I've made a mess of my college career, but I want to finish it. Because I was in school, even though my grades were horrible at the time. But I decided I wanted to go to a Christian college because I needed to get away from people who did the things that I was trying not to do. And I figured Christian college was the best place to do that. I miraculously got in. Again, my GPA was nothing. And this was a private Christian school, but in my admission letter, I told them, look, I'm trying to turn my life around. I rededicated my life to the Lord, which I had done. And I think this is where I need to be, and they let me in. I couldn't believe it. And thus started my progression of faith again. And at the schools, George Fox University in Portland, I had friends who taught me about prayer, who taught me about faith, taught me about God. I met my husband there. It was a time of great growth where I really let go, you know, and I really tried to give myself as much as I knew how to God and to this new way of life. And it progressed from that point for me.
Thanks be to God.
Yeah. And my husband and I, once we got married, we moved to Southern California. Chris attended Fuller Theological Seminary. I worked there, attended there for a while too. And we got involved in ministry down there right away. There was this church that did inner city youth stuff. So we were working with kids in the streets in Los Angeles. We were doing basketball ministry. There was a lot of really good things happening. But around that time, also, you know, this had been since I was 21. I think I was 25 now. I've been playing with the idea that, you know, I'm older now, I'm wiser now. I know drugs aren't a thing that I can do anymore, but maybe I can still drink. You know, I mean, I figured it was a way, you know, drinking wasn't necessarily the problem. I just learned to drink that way. I guess I can unlearn it. That's what I thought. And so, New Year's Eve, 2005, the pastor, his wife, my husband, and myself rang in the new year with champagne. And so I hit the ground running again with that. Now, it looked a lot different this time. I am Christian now. I mean, not like I wasn't before, but I'm active in my faith. I'm doing ministry. I'm working at a seminary. I'm attending a seminary. So I'm different, right? But see, what I didn't understand, and what I understand now is, alcoholism is alcoholism, whether you're in the church or not. But it took me a long time to figure that out. And so, there's my marriage picture, by the way, I forgot about that.
Very nice.
Yeah. All right. So, all this really good stuff is happening in my faith. I mean, I'm going leaps and bounds in it. We're traveling around the world. This is in Kazakhstan. That's in front of a yurt where my husband had just done a sermon. The man on the very right in the tan shirt, that's our spiritual mentor. He was a pastor at the time, teaching us about prayer. We're doing inner healing ministry around the world. He had gone to Korea on that trip as well. I mean, there's so many incredible things that are happening. And yet, there's this other part of me where when I drink, I really can't stop once I start, and I don't understand what it is. I don't understand what's going on. I'm confused a lot about it. So, on the one hand, God is doing these amazing things in my life, and on the other hand, this other part of my life is kind of spiraling out of control, and I didn't even know it. I remember there were periods where I had these inklings like, maybe you shouldn't drink, Elizabeth, because this doesn't really seem to be turning out very good for you. And then I had these thoughts about, no, because I've given all of my life to God. This one thing, this is mine. This is mine. I'm not giving this to you, God. I'm not giving it to you, God. It's mine. I gotta have one thing that I enjoy in life, you know. These are the things I said to myself. I started having children. Again, the drinking looks different for me. When I was young, it was every day. Now it's intermittent. I don't have to drink when I'm pregnant. This is a new thing for me. Because before I had to drink every day. So it's different. It's different. It's not the same. These are the things I told myself. Again, God is growing my life and my family, and yet there's still this part of me that is totally and completely broken. During this time, right after I had birth to my daughter, around the time of that, I graduated with my master's in spiritual formation. Again, pursuing God. It was a huge time of growth in my life. There was a lot of healing that was happening. But I was also noticing that my drinking was progressing. Didn't understand it. But it was taking a toll on the family a little bit. I mean, the thing about alcoholism is it's a family disease, and there's a lot of denial that's wrapped up around it. And so even though these things were happening, even me and Chris, we didn't understand it, we didn't see it. And all the while, my brother, who had been sober for 7 years, relapsed. And he was trying to get back, but he couldn't. And there he is. So while he's struggling with his disease, I moved to Boise, ignorant of my own, and we get involved with a church that alcohol is a big part of it. It was in the North End. It was a non-denominational church there, and alcohol was a big part of it. We would drink at all our Bible studies. We would drink at our church picnics. Hell, we would drink at communion. Excuse me for saying that word. Not the appropriate place.
Hell is in the Bible. It's okay. And most of these people say it anyway.
Yeah.
They just won't admit it in church.
But it was really good for me. So I'm like, okay, I can be in church and I can drink, and this is good, But I was getting to the point where I found I couldn't really go places without it. I couldn't even be in a Bible study without a glass of wine. I didn't understand what was happening. And then there was this point when Alethea was around 2 years old and Ethan was around 4, where we had to move homes because we were renting at the time, and the owners had to move back, and we had like 9 days to get out of our house and move into a new one. And so my parents said, okay, well, we'll take the kids, and you get the house moved while Chris is at work, and then you meet us down back at our place, and they lived in Washington at the time, and then we'll have Thanksgiving. And so my parents took the children, so I could have this time to get the house ready, to pack it up, to move it. And I had 9 days to myself, and out came the vodka. Boy, did it come out. And I would go through bottles of it with absolutely no effect. Now, I say that because looking back, I can understand that the disease of alcoholism in me progressed more in those 9 days than it had in 8 years. And that's just how that is. And I remember being confused by it again, like, what's going on here? Well, we moved into that new house, and like the day before we went to Washington, I had come home thinking about alcohol. I was thinking about it all day. And I remember thinking, well, that's weird. But, I think I was just becoming more, like God's grace in me is helping me become more aware of it. And I remember I went to the freezer, and I start pulling out that vodka, and I hear God's voice in my head, clear. And God told me, Elizabeth, if you continue down this path, you will be lost. And I was like, I have the vodka, and I'm looking around, like, was that real? But I'm gonna pour it anyway. Still gonna have my drink, because that wasn't real, right? So pour my drink. And I sit down next to Chris and I put the drink up to my lips. And it was like the thumb of God pressed down on me. And I felt horror and terror in a way that I never had in my life. And it was almost like it was the absence of God, almost like God was showing me what was coming. And I started shaking, and I just threw the drink at Chris, and I was like, take it, like, I can't do this, I can't do this. And I didn't know why, I still didn't know why. Again, no idea I'm an alcoholic, none. And so I went a month and a half without drinking, not knowing why I wasn't drinking, just that I wasn't supposed to. Until one day I get a call from that pastor friend of mine from Los Angeles, who had, by the way, moved to Boise a year before we had. He was a pastor here in Boise, and he was having trouble too. And he knew that I had a past with that, and he said, you know, I'm thinking of trying out this 12-step program, and I heard you'd be willing to go with me. And I, of course, still not thinking I had a problem, said, well, yeah, I'll go with you. I'm such a wonderful person, I'll take you, you know? And so I go with him. I mean, isn't that, it's such a God thing. I mean, this is the man that I started drinking with on New Year's Eve, and we go to this meeting together on New Year's Day. Like, I mean, it was like 8 years later or something like that. It's just amazing. And we go to this meeting, and God opened my eyes to my reality, to who I was, that I had been blinded to my whole life. Like, I had no idea what it was that I had, what it was that I suffered from. And in that meeting, it was like the blinders were taken off. And I realized that I was an alcoholic, and that I always had that from the first drink. I mean, that's just how it was for me. And I had this flash of this conversation my dad had told my brother and I when we were young. My parents weren't drinkers. They didn't drink, you know. But my dad had sat us down and he told us when we were kids, Elizabeth and Jim, you have a lot of alcoholism and addiction that runs in your family. You need to be very, very, very careful. It's just there. It's with, you know, it's in the blood for us. And my brother and I's, our response was, sure, Dad, we got this. We're okay. Well, my dad was right. Of course, parents, you never want to be right, but they always are. And it happened to be part of us. Now, the reason I had my brother up here was a year after I got sober, my brother died from his addiction. He was 38 years old. I had been in this 12-step program a year at that point, and I watched my brother deteriorate that year. And I can tell you, I found out that I was an alcoholic. I was terrified because I knew what it meant. I had seen the destruction and the way it had absolutely destroyed everything in my brother's life, and I knew it would do the same thing to me. And I was scared. And I thought, I have been involved in my faith in such a huge way, and I'm drunk. Like, what does this mean? How am I going to get sober? I didn't know what to do. And so all I could do was start over from square one. Every day I got on my knees and I said, God, I can't do this. You have to do this, because if I do this, I'm going to be drunk, and I know it. And that has been my progression up to this point. That was over 4 years ago. I walked through my brother's death, and the reality of what this disease is for me is that this is literally a life or death thing for me. My brother and I are cut from the same cloth, and in the program that I'm a part of, I see people and they die a lot from it. So is my family. So God's covenant love in addiction, what is that? Well, for me, that is that the greatest thing God ever did for me was to show me who I really was. Because there's something so powerful in self-deception. There's something so powerful in denial. That I could live my whole life and not even know that I'm so broken. And so now I get to wake up every day and know what I am, and know what is in me, and know that God is still bigger than that, and more powerful than that. But to also know that I have a responsibility to every day anew give my life back again into the care of that God. And for me, that means a death to self. What it talked about there in that verse that I chose, that we are clay jars, we're broken. I remember not long, I guess it was a few years ago when I'm in the midst of this journey, I was working for this nonprofit that rehoused homeless families, and there was a pastor there who worked with us. And I remember just, sometimes when you wake up with this knowledge about yourself, it can be pretty kind of discouraging. Like, gosh, really, Elizabeth? Like, this is who you are, And I remember feeling really down about it. And I was talking to him. And I was talking about that verse, what the verse was kind of speaking to me, that we are these old clay pots, with treasures in them. That God puts his treasure in us, in our brokenness. And he got this light in his eyes, and he ran into his office and he brought it back out, and he legitimately had a clay pot, just like these old-fashioned clay pots with the lid. And he says, okay, Elizabeth, look at this pot. And I said, okay. He says, imagine that I put a candle in here and I light it. And I put a lid over the pot. How much light do you see coming out of it? I said, well, I don't see any light coming out of it. He's like, all right. We turned the pot around, and on the other side, it was all busted and broken, and there was a big hole in it. And he says, how about now? And I said, well, I would see a lot of light coming out. And he's like, and that's exactly how it is in your life. That's exactly how God works in your life. And so for me, these past 4 years have been coming to terms with my brokenness, with my weakness, with my sin, with this disease that I have in my body, and knowing that God is bigger than it, so much bigger so that God will use it for his good and for his glory. And that's just me, that's in the Columbia River Gorge, where I grew up. And it's just, I don't know, I picked it because I thought, it's me. So, and so, yeah.
Thanks be to God for just this child of God who allows light to shine forth from her and her family. Elizabeth, Chrissy and I have been in Boise for a year now. This is our 53rd Sunday here. And over this past year, you and Chris have been terrific friends, dare say teachers, about the spiritual life. So I am very grateful for your incredible testimony about God's covenant love through your own life and how you continue to let God's light shine through you. You may have noticed that in our scripture reading, it's Palm Sunday. We didn't hear any scripture verses about Jesus walking in, right? Did you notice that? I hope you did. I think this story speaks to the narrative. Because don't we all want to go riding through life on a donkey with people saying how wonderful we are, right? But we know as Christians that the story doesn't end there. The reality for our lives is that the next step of the journey is the realization that we have to die. We have to die to ourselves. And as you had to die to alcohol. All of us have this one thing in our life that we say, oh, Lord, you've been good to us. I'm going to live my life for you, but this is mine. And that one thing, whether it's alcohol or drugs, or whether it's pride, or whether it's the accumulation of wealth, or whatever it is, because my sense is that God is tugging on your heart saying, yeah, that thing that you're thinking about right now, that we play this tug of war with our God. God says, you gotta die to that. Life is not about the hosannas. Life is about dying to that so you can experience the blessing of resurrection.
Right.
Can you tell us a little more? Sorry, preachers preach.
So I was just going to say on that note that what this daily experience that I have that, and I will continue to have with me the rest of my life, because this doesn't go away. Alcoholism does not go away. It will always be with me. Is that before, when I was in my faith, I had this kind of complacency with the cross. It was like, yes, this is what God did. Okay, great. Whereas now, when God has shown me who and what I am, and that I really have to completely and totally 100% abandon myself to God every day, is that I've moved from this complacency with the cross into more of a communion with the cross. Because every day is a day when I get to lay my ego, when I get to lay my ideas, my plans, my me, what do I want? That goes down at the cross. And I can't, because I can't live that way. When I run my life, I ruin it. I ruin it. I've shown myself that. I cannot trust myself, but I can trust in this God in me. And so every day I just say, okay, God, like, you have to do this, because I can't do this apart from you. I can't. And the reality of that, I mean, I know that's a reality for humanity, but God has made this reality so palpable in my life that it's like total and complete abandonment to God. And there are days when I don't do it well, when I fail and I think it's about me again, and it's not. It's not. And I think it's about me. And God reminds me so gently and so lovingly, Elizabeth, this has to be about me. It has to be about something bigger. And so for me, with Easter, I mean, it brings such communion with that death to self of, I don't even know how to say it, but like, I've literally given all that other stuff that I was holding on to God, so that I can, it's like this idea of all those years when I was young, I was trying to find freedom, trying to find peace, trying to find fulfillment. And at long last, I found it in my brokenness, And I have more freedom and more peace in my life than I have in my entire life. And I'm not letting that go. I'm not. Because I'm not letting God go. There's one more thing I want to say, and then I'll shut up. And that is that living this way is not an easy thing. It's very scary, because I never know what God's going to do. It's like when you give your whole life to God, like literally, like wake up every day, okay, God, what do you want me to do today? But there's this quote from C.S. Lewis that I love. And it comes from the Chronicles of Narnia, from the first book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And just that point in the book where the children have just come into Narnia, and they come into this land that is controlled by this white witch, where it's always winter and never Christmas. Kind of feels like that today, right? Always winter and never spring. And they're beginning to know that there is trouble, and they're afraid. They also are coming to know these really miraculous things, like animals talk, and they're talking to this one animal, and he's telling them, Mr. Beaver, about this great lion who's the king of Narnia, who's come back into Narnia and has broken the spell, and spring is here, spring is coming. And one of the children, kind of afraid, says, well, it's a lion, is he safe? And the beaver looks at her and he goes, safe? No, he's not safe. Of course he's not safe. But he's good. He's the king, I tell you. And that is my experience with God. God is not safe. and what I want to think is safe. I can't control what I want to control. I can control God in the way I want God to be. But God is good. God is really, really good. And I love that. I love that about God. That even though I can't predict or control what God's going to bring in front of me, have me walk through, I know that God will enable me to walk through it with the grace and mercy that God has given me. Each and every day I walk through what I've walked through so far. And that at the end, I don't know, it's absolutely magnificent. So that's all I have.
Thanks be to God for that. Elizabeth, I just feel in my spirit that there are a number of hearts that have been touched by your testimony about God's grace as evident through Christ's light that shines within your brokenness. And I pray for all of us that we may give that one thing back to God. Die to it. Let ourselves be broken, for it's in that brokenness, according to Paul, that God's light shines in this world. Let's pray. Lord, we give you thanks for Elizabeth, this beautiful child of God, baptized at the age of 7, that you have never let go of, and that in her experience and the realities of life, that you have claimed her and said, you are mine, Elizabeth, and dare we believe that God says the same thing about us, calling us forth to this life that is not safe, but it is good when we find it in you. So give all of us the courage that we may die to that to which we need to die, so that we may be resurrected in new life that is incredibly magnificent. In Jesus' name, amen. Let's give